friends, thanks for joining me today. To state the obvious, I love to read, but I also love to play video games. It can be a struggle sometimes to choose between reading or playing a game when I have free time, and this book combines my love for both hobbies. I'm going to be reviewing Bioshock Rapture by John Shirley. Shirley has written a lot of science fiction and horror stories, as well as TV scripts and screenplays, including for the movie The Crow, so it sounds like he's no stranger to writing for visual mediums, and I think he was a good fit to write this story. Now, I've never actually played Bioshock myself. I have fond memories of watching my dad play it on Xbox 360 way back in 2007, and I loved the gritty, post-apocalyptic Art Deco vibe it had going on and all the cool enemies and powers you could have. I didn't remember much about the plot before reading, but I have some general knowledge about the game. If you know nothing about the game, you probably won't enjoy this as much as someone who has either played it or is at least familiar with it. There were probably some references that went right over my head, but players of the game probably would have appreciated had they read it. So enough chattering, let me get into my review. So this book is a prequel to the first Bioshock game. It begins during the end of World War II, shortly after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan in 1945. Andrew Ryan, a rich, highly successful businessman and Russian immigrant, decides that he's had enough of the current state of the world that he believes is falling apart. His dreams are of a place that's safe from the threat of atomic war, that's free from government regulations, organized religion, social shackles on science, technology, and economic growth. Of course, such a place doesn't exist, so he decides to make one. Ryan recruits followers that agree with his ideals to build the city of Rapture, a secret, sprawling utopia constructed beneath the waters of the North Atlantic. His belief is that if you have the drive and the skills to earn your way in the world, you have the right to do so freely. But there can be no handouts or altruism in his utopia. It must be every man for himself, and he believes that such a mentality is the best way to move society forward. In theory, there are few rules in Rapture. You can't run around killing people or anything like that, but you can set your own prices, make your own business model, perform whatever scientific experiments you desire without having to worry about ethics. But one rule is firmly enforced. Once you enter Rapture, you can never leave. There are a lot of characters in this book. It was a little difficult to tell who was supposed to be important and who wasn't. That's probably one of those things that will make this more enjoyable to someone who has played the game. They know those characters' roles in the game and their significance. One of the main characters is a plumber slash mechanic named Bill McDonough. Hopefully I pronounced that right. And he's hired on as Ryan's building engineer and becomes one of his closest confidants. The primary antagonist is a guy with shifting identities named Frank Fontaine, a grifter and con man from the surface world who finds a way to establish himself in Rapture in order to play the long con. He has no interest in Ryan's ideals or vision. He's just in it for the power and the money. He finds several ways to heavily influence the markets and citizens of Rapture to cause unrest to his benefit. A huge contributor to the plot is the discovery of this substance called Atom. When injected into the body and powered by another substance called Eve, plasmids made of Atom grant the user incredible powers such as super strength or the ability to shoot fire or electricity from your body. It's available to anyone that can pay, and I'll leave you to ponder what happens as a result. There are lots of very eccentric, one might even say mentally unstable people in this underwater city, from artists to scientists to surgeons. A lot of the characters come across as a little two-dimensional, people who are basically caricatures of the mad scientist or whimsical murderer archetypes. Ryan himself is a pig-headed zealot with ideas that sound great in theory, but quickly break down in practice, and the negative consequences of them can't be ignored in real life the way that they can in your imagination. If you couldn't guess from what I've told you so far, this story doesn't have a happy ending. The back of this book tells you as much. It says, the very last paragraph, But this utopia suffered a great tragedy. This is the story of how it all came to be and how it all ended. This book chronicles the rise and fall of Rapture, and the reader is there to enjoy the show. I spent more time in this review going over details of the plot than I normally do, and that's because it's written in a third-person, omniscient perspective. There's very little that you as the reader don't know. There are several plots and schemes going on, but the reader is aware of them, and even someone who doesn't know anything about the game knows from the back that it ends poorly in some way. It's all about the journey, not so much the destination in this case. As a story completely on its own merit, not considering the game at all, it ends in an unsatisfying way. Everything is left open and unresolved because that's where the first game begins. So the only real ending you get is to Bill McDonough's storyline. Not to any of the big things going on in Rapture that you build through, or that you build towards through the rest of the book. But as a supplement to the game, it's interesting to see the origin story of the city, the enemies, and the characters. So it all depends on if you're familiar with the main game. If you aren't, this may not be a satisfying story, but if the premise sounds interesting to you, then maybe give this a shot. If you've played the games, it's a fun return to the world and explains things that aren't covered in Bioshock itself, or at least not nearly in as much detail. But I'm assuming, actually, because I haven't played the game, so I can't actually be sure that a lot of this wasn't covered in the game, but I would imagine that this supplemental material will introduce some things that you didn't dive into in the game very deeply. So I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. It was entertaining, but I found most of the characters to be rather flat, especially a lot of the bad guys. And with my limited knowledge of the game, I didn't have those rewarding moments of recognition that the author probably went for. The whole thing was still fascinating to watch unfold, and I will say that I'm interested in playing the game for myself now for sure, when I can find the time between all the books I want to read and the other games I need to get through. So let me know if you've played Bioshock, if you've played any of the Bioshock games, especially the first and second one, and if you enjoyed them, and if this book sounds interesting to you, whether you've played them or not. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!